Today is January 15th, 2009, and I have the pleasure and privilege of interviewing Sanford Fagadau today. I'm delighted to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for meeting with us today. I have questions that I'd like to ask you, and let's start at the beginning. Would you tell me a little bit about your family background?
From a family background. Well, I grew up, I was not actually born in Wichita Falls, Texas, but I grew up there from the age of 4 weeks till I left there in 1944. My father came from Romania in 1920, and he was sent here by the Romanian government to study petroleum engineering in the United States. And he went to the University of Pittsburgh, which was the first school of petroleum engineering in the world. And he stayed there 2 years and got his degree in petroleum engineering. Before that, he had graduated from the University of Grenoble in Grenoble, France, as a civil engineer. And then he went, finished the, you can't, I'm not loud enough?
That's what Bruce said.
Okay. After he graduated, he went to work for a professor who was at the University of Pittsburgh, and he was with that professor for about 4 or 5 years, and then he was hired by one of their clients to move to Wichita Falls, Texas, and take over the management of a small oil company in Wichita Falls called the Venezuelan Mexican Oil Company. And I always make this statement that I don't think they had any oil production either in Venezuela or Mexico, but that was the name of the company. Anyway.
So you were born in Pittsburgh?
But I was born in Pittsburgh, and my mother, her mother didn't think there were doctors in Wichita Falls, and she was concerned. So she thought it would be better if I would be born there, and then she'd take me to Wichita Falls, which she did. And of course, I got there in 1928.
What was your exact birth date?
July 2nd, 1928.
And where was your mother from?
My mother's from Romania also, but she lived in Pittsburgh from the early 1900s. And she met my father at the Cosmopolitan Club at the University of Pittsburgh. And they got married after he graduated from Pittsburgh. They got married.
So you grew up in Wichita Falls, and you left in 1944.
Right. I went to college.
And where did you go to college?
To Ohio State University.
Mm-hmm.
And that was mainly because my father thought it would be better to be a little better education, maybe if I went someplace out of Texas instead of staying in Texas. And so that's how I ended up in Ohio.
What was it like growing up in Wichita Falls?
It's a long story.
Well, we've got lots of time.
Well, it was interesting. I had a lot of friends. It's basically a somewhat anti-Semitic city. Most of the money in Wichita Falls came from oil and from cattle, and there were not a lot of Jewish people in, as you know, the Zales and Levines and so on. But I enjoyed it. I belonged to a high school fraternity, which
A Jewish high school fraternity?
No, it was not Jewish. It was Gentile, and I think I and one other boy by the name of Art were the only Jewish members of the fraternity, and so that was fun during high school. And then I went off to school in '44, and I never lived there after that.
What was the Jewish community like in Wichita Falls?
Well, we had a nice community. We had a nice temple. I think the temple had about 100 families and so on. And it was nice. And we had a nice group of people. And your father-in-law and
My father.
Your father.
My father. Uh-huh.
And the
So you all
sales, and there were just a lot of people.
So were you and Leo Fields friends as children?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, we went to Sunday school together.
Uh-huh.
And I was, I think, a year ahead of your father in
Okay.
school.
Okay. That's a wonderful story to hear. Tell me a little bit about your interests when you were a child? What did you enjoy doing?
Well, I was active in the Boy Scouts, and I became an Eagle Scout at the age of 13, which was very young. And so I enjoyed that, and that was mostly what I did, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And then so you left to go to Ohio State, and tell me a little bit about your college experiences.
A lot of experiences. I liked Ohio State. It was a very good school, and I knew that I was going to study geology, and it had a good department of geology. Not necessarily oil geology, but a good department of general geology. And I placed a fraternity at Ohio State when I got there. In fact, I never got out of the fraternity house, so and it was just a fun school. It was a fun school.
So you lived in the fraternity house?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
For a couple years.
And what was was there a large number of Jewish students in
Yes,
Ohio
there was
State?
a lot of Jewish students. A lot of them came from Toledo, Ohio, and from Dayton, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. So there were quite a few. I think there were about 4 or 5 fraternities, Jewish fraternities, and 3 sororities, I guess, at Ohio State, Jewish sororities.
Was it unusual at the time to go so far away from home for college?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know what other people did, so I don't know whether it was or not. But I enjoyed it.
So you got your undergraduate degree in geology at Ohio State.
Right. And then I earned a master's degree and then a PhD in 1952.
So you continued on.
Primarily because I met a beautiful girl.
Oh.
And I was later married.
Uh-huh.
And we went together for 2 or 3 years, and finally, at the end of her junior year, and when I got my master's degree, we got married.
And where was Jean from?
From Youngstown, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived in Columbus. We stayed in Columbus. I had 2 more years to go to finish, and we stayed there 2 or 3. I can't remember now. But she graduated and then got a job teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I finished school, and then after that, went to work for what became ARCO, which was Atlantic Refining Company. And our first assignment was Shreveport, Louisiana. And when I graduated, they shipped us to Shreveport, Louisiana, and we were there for about 11 months. And then we had a funny story to tell in the house, because I kept saying to Jeannie, I said, "Don't worry, Shreveport's not so bad. It could be Roswell, New Mexico." Well, the next assignment was Roswell, New Mexico. So we went to Roswell, New Mexico, and we lived there 2 years. And then I left Atlantic and moved to Dallas. I always knew I wanted to go and be in the oil business and be by myself.
And be by yourself.
With my father.
And with your father. So
Right.
your father was still in Wichita Falls?
He had left Wichita Falls, maybe, I guess they moved to Dallas a couple years before I moved to Dallas.
Okay.
And, but he had been there and he was very active. He and Morrisdale and several others were very active in the Jewish community.
Did you, I realized I didn't ask you about your brothers and sisters.
I have a sister who is 3 years older than me, and she graduated Wichita Falls High School and went to the University of Texas for a year, and then she ended up at Ohio State also.
Oh, okay, and her name is?
June, what should I say, Mona June? Yeah, Mona, M-O-N-A, June, J-U-N-E, Fagadau.
Okay.
Sachs, S-A-C-H-S.
Uh-huh. And she's here in Dallas now.
Yes.
Also. So what year did you move to Dallas?
I moved to Dallas in 1955.
And what was it like when you arrived in Dallas in 1955?
Very nice. We first thing that my mother told Jeannie was that asked her if she knew how to play bridge. And Jeannie said, "No, I don't play bridge." She said, well, you'll never have any friends if you don't know how to play bridge. So Jeannie and I, there was a lady at the Dallas Athletic Club by the name of Mrs. Wales who taught bridge. So Jeannie and I took bridge lessons. And I think after a period of time, we thought we were pretty good, so we invited a couple over one night to play bridge. And they fought all night long. And at the end of the evening, Jeannie said to me, she says, "That's my first and last game of bridge." And true enough, she has not played bridge since then.
That's a very cute story. Tell me what it was like living in Dallas in the 1950s.
Well, we lived on Elderwood Street. We had very nice neighbors. There were one or two other Jewish couples on the street, and the rest were Gentile. But we had good neighbors that were Gentile as well as Jewish neighbors. And the kids grew up. There were a lot of young people, so they all grew up and had friends to play with, and so on.
Tell me about your children.
We have 3 children. Chip is the oldest. He's a doctor, an ophthalmologist. Leslie is a lawyer. She's 3 years younger. And then Tom is the youngest. He's 3 years younger than Leslie, and he runs our business now.
And what did you get involved with in the community?
Well, the first thing that I was really involved with, I was involved with AJC for a number of years when Barbara Hurst was the director.
Is that American Jewish Committee?
American Jewish Committee.
Mm-hmm.
But the first position that I held was I was president of the Jewish Family Service, of the Jewish Home for the Aged. And that was 2 years. And from there
And what year, do you remember the years?
Well, I have the data at the office.
Not at,
Somewhere
not
around
important.
1988 maybe to 90, something on that order. And then I worked in the high, the home for adults, and I was president of that. And then I was president of Jewish Federation, and then finally president of Temple Emmanuel.
My goodness, so you went from one agency to the next,
Right.
serving,
So it was about
Working.
a period of about 12 years, I guess, something like that I was involved in a lot of the community work.
and what were some of the issues? Can you recall some of the issues that you faced? For example, when you were president of the Dallas, of the Jewish Home for the Aged, what were some of the issues that you faced with
Well,
that?
we had a wonderful director, Herb Shore, and actually even though you're an officer, you don't really do much because he did most everything. I think my most memorable time when I was president of these organizations was when I went to New York to meet with presidents of Jewish federations from all over the country when they first decided to let Russian Jews out to go to Israel. And we had to raise money for that. And I came back to the Federation, and in giving a report, we had a number of people that were concerned about that because they said that we can't raise that kind of money in Dallas. We had just finished our general campaign, and that it was too much to ask the community and so forth. And I sort of, I guess tears started coming to my eyes, and I said, we have to. I said, there's no excuse. We have to raise this money. And we did. We went out, we raised everything that we were supposed to do.
Do you remember what it was that you needed to raise?
No, I don't now.
And this was in the 1980s?
This was in sometime in the latter part of the 80s or early 90s maybe.
And what do you recall about the numbers of Soviet Jews who came?
I don't know. We had a number that came into Dallas at that time, of course, and it was some were nice and fairly easy to work with. Some were not. And but
What were some of the challenges of settling?
Well, because they felt that they were entitled to equipment that they needed to have, computers and typewriters and things like that. And I think we weren't prepared for that at the time. But generally, later on, most of them got settled and everything turned out pretty well.
And who was the executive director of the Jewish Federation?
Mo Stein was the executive director.
And so you went from the Federation, and then your last major responsibility
Was the temple.
was the temple.
And
that-
Shelley Zimmerman was the rabbi at the temple.
And that was Temple Emmanuel.
Right.
And tell me a little bit about your work at the temple.
Well, the work at the temple was primarily, we were doing some building at the time. We were adding space, the Pullman Hall and various other things in the temple at that time. So that was what it was, most of it. But midway in my term of office, Shelley took a job with the Hebrew Union College. So he left here, and so I was faced with having to get a new rabbi. And we formed a search committee, and of course, we had a number of interviews with different people. Some of them very nice, but everybody seemed to want David, and so that's who ended up being a rabbi.
Tell me a little bit about, for the record, who David is.
David Stern he was a young rabbi, graduated at Hebrew Union College from New York, I think, and was at Temple Emmanuel for a number of years before this took place. I think he had been with Temple Emmanuel maybe 4 or 5 years or 6 years before we asked him to be the head rabbi.
So he was invited to serve as the head rabbi on your watch.
Right. Right.
Well, that was a big accomplishment.
Well, and there was, there's another interesting little story about that too, because Jeannie and I went up to Aspen that summer, and when I got to Aspen, I told Jeannie one night, I said, David is up visiting his father, and I said this would be a wonderful time for me to write him a short letter about how much we want him to be the rabbi of our temple. Well, I had two chairs of the committee, Harold Kleinman and help me, Jeannie.
Carmen? I don't think you ought to name names.
Anyway, a woman was
And
the
someone
co-chair,
else?
Carmen Michael.
Okay.
So I told Carmen Michael what I had done, that I had written David a short letter on a piece of yellow paper, explaining, giving him reasons why I thought he should accept our offer of being the rabbi. And she told me, she says, if you had no business doing that without going to the whole committee, and if he doesn't accept it, you're going to get the blame for it. Well, sure enough, when David's father saw that short letter that I wrote, he said, if you don't accept it, I'm going to accept it. And David became my rabbi.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah.
That's just a wonderful story. And so in addition then to taking the leadership roles in the Jewish community, were you involved? Have you been involved in non-Jewish civic organizations?
Not really, not to any great extent. Actually, Jeannie and I are sort of divided on that. She does most of the community work, and I did the Jewish community work.
And you did the Jewish community
But she
work.
also did Jewish community work also.
Yes, I look forward to hearing about that in just a little while. Tell me a little bit more about your business.
Well, there are not many Jewish people in the oil business, and especially in this part of the country. There were a number of families in Houston and Oklahoma City and Tulsa and so on, but not very many in Dallas. And after I left ARCO and moved to Dallas, then I just started trying to find oil, and did a lot of geological work, and then I got big enough where I could hire some outside help to come in and help me. And so when my father, meanwhile, got sick, and he was not able to, I think he died when he was 72 years of age, but he had been sick about 10 years before he died, so he was not able to do much in those years. And it's an exciting business. I've always loved it. I still love it to this day.
That's great.
I wouldn't quit, and that's it.
And do you do your oil drilling in Texas or?
Mostly in Texas, but also West Texas, North Texas, mostly a lot in Oklahoma, and a lot in New Mexico. So we're sort of scattered around.
So were you traveling a lot while you were raising the children?
Well, only to the field, only out to the oil field, and so it wasn't too much.
Let me see here. Now, you were telling me that you have 3 children,
Right.
and do you have grandchildren?
We have 6 grandchildren. Chip has two daughters. One is married, and the other one, who is now 26, 28, 27, lives in New York. She graduated from Cornell, and she's working in New York. My daughter has 2 sons. One son is graduating from the University of Denver Law School this spring, and the other one is a senior and graduating from NYU. And he, by the way, was the president of the Young Democrats at NYU this past year. And then Tommy has 2 daughters.
Why don't we pause for just a minute?
That is.
Get it quicker than I was like.
We were very fortunate in that we met. I guess probably my sister helped us meet some people that of course we didn't know anybody to speak of in Dallas, and then we met a lot of people. Met you and your husband and
Ruth and Dave Andrus.
right, and gradually had a lot of people that we became friends with, and it was a fun place to live. And still is. Dallas is still a great city, and so we still stay busy. We stay busier now in the Gentile community really more than the Jewish community, because Jeannie's active in a lot of art organizations.
So when you say you stay busy in the Gentile community, what do you mean?
Well, I don't know.
You mean socially?
Socially, you're active in the
Yeah,
arts.
yeah.
Okay. When we were,
means we go to so many things every night of the week.
you have a very busy social life, it sounds like.
No, cultural life.
Cultural.
We're at a symphony, or we're at a museum, or something.
Well, it's wonderful. Before we stopped the tape a minute ago, you were telling me a little bit about your grandchildren, Tex,
Okay,
and
now
I'd like to...
Tommy's got 2 daughters. One is going to be a junior at NYU. One's going to be a junior at NYU.
That's Hannah.
Hannah.
Yes.
And Hillary is graduating Green Hill this spring.
Green Hill High School.
And we don't know where she's going to go yet.
So
At
that's
least
exciting.
I don't know where she's going to go. Do you know where she's going to go?
And for the record, Leslie's boys' names are,
Matthew and Neil
and their last name?
is Schechter, Schechter.
Yes, okay. And Chip
And
and
Leslie,
Eddie's
Leslie has done very well. Leslie is now on the governor's staff and has been for the past 2 years of the state of Tennessee. She is in charge of finance and commerce for the state of Tennessee. And she's a lawyer, and so we're proud of her.
Of course. And Chip and Evie's daughters' names?
Is Flauren, Flauren, and she's married to, well, I have to tell you about that one too.
To Jason?
She's married to a young man named Jason Bender, and Alyssa has a boyfriend who we think may end up being her husband, but we can't say anything about that.
Well, we won't say a word.
But Jason Bender, when we lived in Shreveport, when Jeannie and I were in Shreveport for the 11 months, we met Jack and Sophie Bender. And Sophie Bender is Ruth Kleinman's sister from Houston. And they were living in Shreveport, and we met them at a party and became friendly with them. And it turned out that Jason is their grandson. And when he asked Chip if he could have Florence hand in marriage, he told me, now, bear in mind that your father and mother were friends of my grandmother and grandfather for years before this. So I thought that was a cute story.
That's a very cute story. How do you think that Dallas has changed over the years?
Well, we're a larger community, and we have so many more people. I don't know how you would say it's changed particularly. I think it was a nice city when we came here, and it's still a nice city.
Do you see differences in the Dallas Jewish community?
No, I think the Dallas Jewish community has grown, and I think they've been very responsive in charity and so on. And so I think the community's done well.
Did you have role models as a young man, or even now?
I don't know that I ever had role models. I mean, I loved my father, and I thought the world of him. And my mother also. She was a fine lady. But I don't know that I ever had any role models.
Okay. What are some of the things that you were proud of your, as you reflect over raising your family and your career and your community involvement?
Well, I guess I'd be proud over that I had the ability to provide a good living for them, to see them all through school, through their education. They all grew up to be good citizens, nice people. I couldn't be more proud of anybody other than the 3 children. And that's it, I guess.
Well, I think that's very special. Is there anything that you would like to add?
No, not really.
Well, if you think of it later, I will
Okay.
look forward to hearing from you. And this concludes our interview. And thank you very much.
Thank you for having the interview.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Your father was the perfect role.
My father and mother moved to Dallas. The reason they finally decided to move to Dallas, I've been having lived in Wichita Falls since 20, 30 years, something like that. That my father was co-president of the Council for Christians and Jews in Wichita Falls. And a very good friend, Gentile friend of his, was the other co-chair-president. And they started a petroleum club in Wichita Falls, and they wanted to affiliate with the petroleum club in Dallas. And Dallas Petroleum Club did not allow Jewish members. And so when he heard that his co-president, his good friend, was going to be on the board of directors of the petroleum club in Wichita Falls, he said, how can you do that when they don't allow Jews and so forth? And you're also co-president of the Council of Christians and Jews. So he quit the Council of Christians and Jews.
Okay.
And my father at that point said, it's time for us to move.
Not his father, the other man.
Huh?
What I wanted you to say was the role model, your father
Oh, well,
was.
yeah, the 2 people that most active in the Jewish community for so many years were Morris Hill and my father. And they, both at the temple and in all the fundraising for the Catholic Hospital, for the YMCA. My father was very active in the Masons. He was a potentate of the shrine. And so he had a lot of, he was very active in the community.
Did your parents continue a relationship with other immigrants from Romania?
There weren't any that I know of, not in Wichita Falls. I'm sure he would have had I don't know.
Was it, were you aware as a child that it was challenging for your parents coming from another country and settling in the United States?
That's a good question. I don't know that I was aware of it. They seem to have adjusted beautifully. My father couldn't speak English when he came here. He could speak French and Romanian, but he couldn't, in Hebrew, but or Yiddish, I guess you'd say, but he couldn't speak English, but he learned how to speak English, and he didn't have much of an accent, really. He was very smart. And my mother had been here already since the early teens in Pittsburgh, so I guess she already could speak English. Not as well as my father, though, however.
Did the two families know one another coming back in Romania?
I'm sorry.
Did the two families know of one
No.
another? No. So
They were from small towns, but different towns. Not far apart as it turned out, but they were small towns. But my father's family was very lucky in Romania because, and I'm not sure of all of this, but from what I remember, his great-grandfather had fought in the war when Romania became a country. And as a result of that, his family was given educational privileges. So everybody in my father's family had an education, and he had one brother was a doctor, one brother was a lawyer, one brother was in business, one sister was a pharmacist. They all had college educations, and that's how my father had his college education in France before he came to the United States.
thank you for sharing this with us.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Very good.
That was a